Good afternoon, everyone. I'm watching people slowly file into the webinar, so I'll allow you all a few more seconds to get situated. Okay. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'm Jana Rutler. I'm the Grants and Technical Services Manager at the Preservation League of New York State. And today we're going to talk about the Preservation League's Preservation Opportunity Fund grant program. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for viewing after the fact on our website and our YouTube page. You will also have the opportunity to share that with your friends who may have missed it. Captions are enabled, so if you need captions, you can turn those on through your Zoom taskbar. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and I will pause periodically to address your questions. Be sure and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Find us on our website, and I will provide contact information a little further on. If you are an architect in attendance, interested in receiving credit for your attendance today, we're offering one continuing education credit through the New York State Education Department. If you're interested in obtaining this credit, please send an email to info@preservenys.org so we can get you a certificate of completion, and that will be provided to you so that you can self-report and maintain your license. So if by chance you are not familiar with the Preservation League of New York State and who we are the nonprofit organization serving the entire state of New York with historic preservation advocacy grants and programs. We've been around since 1974. We were established with help from the New York State Council on the Arts back then to provide a unified voice for preservation in New York State. We work together with colleagues all across the state. You may be familiar with your local preservation colleagues, such as Preservation Long Island, Preservation Buffalo Niagara, the Landmark Society of Western New York, and Arch, and several others in between. We work closely with them to provide you the tools you need to make historic preservation a part of your local community's preservation and revitalization. We provide grants. You may be familiar with our other grant programs, Preserve New York and TAG. Those are both re-grant programs through the New York State Council on the Arts. We're very proud of those programs. This program that we're talking about today, the Preservation Opportunity Fund, is an in-house grant program that the League developed to help organizations with their capital projects. We provide technical assistance across the state through site visits and online programming, consultations, and meetings to help you with your preservation needs. We award excellence in historic preservation through our Excellence Awards every year. And our 7 to Save list is open now for nominations, and that shines a light on at-risk historic sites across the state. So if you know of a property or a historic resource or site that needs some attention, consider nominating that for our 7 to Save. And keep track of our virtual programs on our website and social media. We have a book club that's a lot of fun and a really interesting way to think about preservation in other ways. So here at the Preservation League, you have 2 people working with you for all of your grant needs. Caitlin Midas is our Director of Preservation. She comes to us from the Landmark Society of Western New York. She's been on board for about a year now, and she is an expert in pretty much anything preservation related. She and I work together to run these grant programs, and we're always happy to answer your questions. So if you have any preservation related questions at all, you can get a hold of us both at once. handily enough through grants at preservenys.org. We also have our individual email addresses and phone numbers. I'm happy to provide those too as well. All right, today we're going to be focusing on, seems to be a mystery what we're focusing on because it's not showing up on my screen anyway, but we're going to talk about the Preservation Opportunity Fund, where it comes from, what it's for, eligibility, how to apply, deadlines, all the things you need to know about POF. Oh, look at that. Okay, I see Caitlin got fancy with the PowerPoint. Basic information, eligibility, funding priorities, and the application process. That's what we'll be talking about today. All right, so the Preservation Opportunity Fund was developed in-house at the Preservation League to help organizations with their capital funding needs. We fund discrete, specific capital projects, bricks and mortar money to help you get things done at your site. These projects should be shovel ready. So we want you to be ready to go and putting together your funding and finding a need for preservation opportunity funds within your funding scheme. We accept proposals of $10,000 to $40,000. You are responsible for at least a one-to-one match. And what that means is that if you are asking us for $20,000, you should also show that you are putting up $20,000 as a match. So a one-to-one match. And we can talk about what those matches can and cannot include in a little while, but that's what the one-to-one match means, also known as a 50-50 match. I know there was some confusion last year about what that meant. So hopefully this is clear enough. We are accepting applications from 501c3 organizations for buildings, sites, structures, and objects. And these things need to be accessible to the public. Eligible applicants, 501c3s. So we are accepting applications from preservation organizations, museums, historic sites, and houses of worship. Now that's different. Please keep in mind that this grant program is different from Preserve New York and TAG grants. The rules and eligibility are a little different, so pay attention and see where you might fit in to this grant program. But we do accept applications from historic houses of worship that have a 501c3 in place that has an ownership interest in the building. So that either owns the building or has at least a 6-year lease on the building. Unfortunately, we cannot accept applications from municipalities for this grant program. State agencies are also ineligible. Friends groups that steward state-owned buildings specifically are not eligible. School districts, private property owners, and homeowners are also not eligible. I see we have a question. I'm going to see if we've answered it. All right, so we will talk about matches in just a moment, but we have a question about when matches need to be secured. So you don't have to have your match secured by the time you apply, but we want to know that you have a really good plan for coming up with that match. You can, list on your application that potential sources of matches have been applied for, are pending, are secured, etc. So have a good plan at least. Yeah, you don't have to have all of it by the time you apply. Good question. So the property types that we support through the Preservation Opportunity Fund include houses of worship, theaters, performing arts centers, meeting halls, Main Street commercial buildings, sites such as landscapes, gardens, cemeteries, and parks. All right, so 501c3s, though, keep that in mind. But yes, we are supporting these historic resources, bridges, roadways, and paths, if they're historic, bandstands, gazebos, boats, grain elevators, etc. Sculptures, monuments, statuary, and fountains are also eligible objects for the Preservation Opportunity Fund. All right, what kind of work are we supporting through POF? As I mentioned, these need to be discrete capital projects They can be a part of larger projects as long as what you're asking us to fund is a specific work item within that larger project scope. So what you see in the photograph on your screen is Old Fort Johnson. We funded them through POF in our first year running this grant program. That was last year. They have a pretty large roof project going on, and the part that we funded were gutters and downspouts. So, for example, part of a larger project that we are able to fund with preservation opportunity funds. Interior or exterior work is eligible. The work must meet the Secretary of the Interior's standards, and we'll talk a bit about what that means in a moment. So work that does examples of work that qualifies as window repair and rehabilitation, masonry work, repointing, roof work, structural work, HVAC systems, storefronts, and historic finishes. I invite questions about what examples you might be thinking of applying for, but these are some popular examples of what folks have applied for in the past. So I mentioned the Secretary of the Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties. This is the guidance that the National Park Service has put together to guide historic preservation best practices. This is a PDF document available online for download. It's a pretty hefty document, but there are sections to it that you'll want to pay attention to. There is a specific section on standards and guidelines for historic preservation, specifically rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction, although we do not support reconstruction through POF, but we support the other things. So we'll talk in a moment about what these mean. So historic preservation specifically is focusing on the maintenance and repair of existing historic materials and the retention of the property's form. So retaining what you have, repairing what you can, and if something needs to be replaced, replacing it in kind, which means replacing it with the same look and, if possible, the same materials. Rehabilitation is probably the most popular out of these from what I've seen. So this is making a historic building compatible with modern uses through upgrades and repairs, alterations that make it usable in the 21st century while retaining the property's historic characters. So for instance, making a historic building ADA accessible. That would be an example of rehabilitation. Installing modern restrooms would be a rehabilitation project as well. Repairs that keep the building usable is also an example of rehabilitation. So restoration, an overused word in the field of historic preservation, really means rolling back a property to a particular point in time of its history. So if, for example, you have a building that was built in 1893 and it underwent rehabilitations over the years and changes and additions, and you want to restore that building to how it appeared in 1893, that would mean removing additions that were added later, removing changes that were made later and putting back the old stuff or something in kind. It's a very specific process that usually is most useful if you're interpreting a historic building to a particular point in time. So this isn't as common as you might think. Rehabilitation and preservation are far more common. So, take note of these terms, use them correctly in your applications. And if you have questions, we're always happy to talk to you about what these mean and how to use them appropriately. So for instance, I have a question. Would restoration of an antique fire truck as a piece associated with a fireman's museum be an eligible object? Suzanne, I don't know the answer to that question. And I want to say, we have a picture of a tugboat somewhere in this PowerPoint presentation. So I'm thinking a fire truck might. It's a slippery slope because we don't support the restoration of works of art, artifacts, but fire truck, good question. I will get back to you on that. I'm going to ask Caitlin. But that's a really good question. I'll have to get back to you later on that, Suzanne. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer right now. We have another question. Um, Demolition of a patio along the back entrance of the museum to install new drainage to prevent heaving from ice. The buildings are, so would this be eligible? Well, demolition as part of a larger project would probably be eligible. It really kind of depends. This depends on whether you're following the Secretary of the Interior standards. Is this an original patio to the building? Was it a later addition? Do you plan on replacing it? The work that you're doing to install new drainage to prevent heaving, that's all good work and that is supported. The demolition of the patio, though, it kind of depends on what it's overall a part of. We'd have to know more about your project. So that brings me to, you could either call us and we could talk to you more about it, or you could submit your letter of inquiry. And we'll talk about that process later, but it would just give us more information about your project, which it sounds like we would need. And as far as requests, can you request less than 10,000? No, sorry. 10,000, we want this to be a meaningful part of a project, a part of a significant project. Anything under 10,000, unfortunately, we're not going to support through this grant program. So another question about eligible projects, which we will talk about more examples in a moment. However, looking at exterior masonry work and waterproofing, would that more appropriately fall under preservation or rehab? And that's a good question. Sure, and you know, the desire to use the terms appropriately, which is a good idea. So for exterior masonry work and waterproofing, that would probably be preservation. You're preserving your the waterproofing though would be rehab. So you could probably answer this in a number of ways. You're preserving your masonry, but you are adding waterproofing, which would be a rehabilitation project. I hope that answer wasn't too confusing, but I would say that if you are preserving and rehabilitating the building, that would be appropriate, either or in both. All right. Andy has a question. Can the grant be used for a specific part of a larger preservation project utilizing other grants? Yes, that's a great question. So yes, it can. You've got a big project, you're putting together your funding scenario and you want this grant to be part of it. Just make sure you can pull out part of that big project and say the league is funding this part. So it needs to be a specific part of that big project. All right, good question. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So these terms, by the way, before I move on too quickly, are they are defined further in the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines. So going back here, if you go online and download this, you can read more about them there in great detail, probably more detail than you really want. But yeah, it's a nice resource to have if you are stewarding a historic building. So projects that are not eligible include those where the work is already underway. We want these to be shovel-ready projects that are ready to go. You're just getting your funding together so that you can start. So we won't fund work that's already underway. That's not to say that the whole huge project can't be underway, but the part that we're being asked to fund should not be started yet. Work that's already been completed, we can't fund. Soft costs, we're not funding through this grant program. However, you can use soft costs as part of your match. So architect's fees, drawings, documents, those soft costs that are a little hard to fund at times can be part of your match. So that's good news. Okay, pre-construction costs, we can't fund either. Applicant, admin, overhead staffing, that sort of thing are not part of this grant program. New construction and additions we're not supporting through POF, and work that does not meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. We want this to be quality preservation work. So follow the standards, make sure that the folks working for you are aware of and following those standards as well. So some other important things to keep in mind. We're only accepting one application for one project per grant cycle per applicant. So decide what you want to apply for and apply for that. But we can't accept more than one application from you per cycle. Should be a shovel-ready project, as I mentioned, all ready to go. Just getting your funding together. We expect work to be completed within 18 months. We don't want it to drag out forever. If you know us through our other grant programs, you probably know we're pretty flexible when things occur like COVID, which threw a wrench in everybody's projects. But, reasonably speaking, we want it to be done within 18 months of signing your grant contract. If you have other grants through us, through Preserve New York, TAG, or another POF grant, we did fund 3 of those last year. We want those to have been completed by the time you apply for this one. And you're not required to have your building listed on the National Register to be eligible. So it just needs to be a historic building, which in general means 50 years or older. Being architecturally and or historically significant will help your cause as well, although it's not necessary, but does need to be an old building at least. All right, so about the funding. So this is a competitive grant program. We came up with this in-house. The fund that we are drawing from used to belong to EPIP. If you remember our emergency preservation intervention program. It was a loan program that sunsetted a few years ago. We took that pot of money, invested it, and we're drawing off of it to create a capital grant program. What that means for you is that this program should grow every year, and our capacity to fund projects will increase over the years. So it's a small grant program right now. Hopefully we'll just continue to grow. To give you some idea, we have somewhere between 50 and 70,000 to give so far. So, keep that in mind when you're thinking about applying. It is a highly competitive program. We were only entertaining requests of $10,000 to $40,000. We may fund one large project. We prefer to fund more than one project, obviously, per cycle. Last year, we funded 3. To give you an idea of your odds, last year, we received about 100 LOIs. We read through them all. We selected about 30 to apply. We received 27 applications and we funded 3. So is it competitive? Heck yeah, but it's really not hard to apply for. And if you have a compelling project that meets our funding priorities, that you just need this additional funding to make it happen, then you've got a good chance. So the LOI is the first step in the process, and it's fairly easy. So you don't have much to lose at this point. A one-to-one cash match is required, although we do allow soft costs to be part of that match. In-kind work does not count, so keep that in mind, soft costs. Your match must be unexpended funds, so they can't be stuff that you've already paid for and already had done. And you will get your grant money when you receive an invoice from your contractor. So you get an invoice, you show it to us, we send you a check. So this, you don't have to shell out money on your own first. This isn't a reimbursement grant. This is a grant to help you pay for your project once you get your contractor's invoice. All right. So I have a question about funding. The need is $200,000 to match an OPRHP grant. So that's an EPF grant or a Parks grant in shorthand to preserve a lighthouse. Wow, a much larger project. So could the POF be used for part of that $200,000 match? Well, that is a really good question. I think that's a good use of these funds. If you can point to a part of that project that these funds would specifically be supporting, then I would say yes. Yeah, show us the scope of work. Show us that that part that POF funds would be used to support. That's about the best answer I can give you there. We don't want our funds to get lost in the shuffle, basically. we want to be able to point to something and say that is what the Preservation League helped us fund. And it should be a $10,000 to $40,000 chunk of that project. Okay, I hope that was a good answer to that question. We can always talk more about it later if that didn't answer your question. So feel free to clarify with me if need be. All right, so we do have some funding priorities that we'd like to meet through our Preservation Opportunity Fund. If you have a history of Preservation League involvement in your organization or your project or your building, then we invite you to apply. If we know you, you probably have a better chance of getting funded, although that's not a guarantee. But especially if you've received a Preserve New York or TAG grant in the past, and if that grant funded a preservation planning study that led to this project that you're embarking on now. So we'd like to see that continuity between our funded preservation planning projects and your capital projects. So that's one priority. If your project benefits traditionally underserved communities, then we will look more closely and prioritize your project. For that, on your screen, you can see one of our grantees from last year, the Thomas Memorial AME Zion Church. And they qualified for POF because they're owned by a 501c3 nonprofit that has an ownership interest in the building, even though it's a historic house of worship. We were happy to support this project. They were also a 7 to Save of ours, so they had that history of league involvement. If your project helps prepare your historic site for the semi-quincentennial, I said it right for once, of the United States, then that also is a funding priority. Be prepared to describe how your project meets these priorities in your application. And if your project incorporates training and apprenticeships opportunities in the preservation trades, we would love to see that. But please don't use conjecture. If you really have the opportunity to incorporate these opportunities in your project, take the essential steps in forming those partnerships, getting confirmation and commitment from the interested parties, and tell us all about it. We'd love to see it. And finally, if your project advances sustainability goals in the face of climate change, that's another priority of ours that we would like to meet. So send us your projects that meet these priorities. If your project doesn't meet any of these priorities, or if you think it doesn't, don't let that stop you from applying. If you think it might, but you're not sure, feel free to give us a call and talk to us about your project, your building, your organization, and see if it meets any of these priorities. But yeah, give us some thought. But these are the things that we're really hoping to advance with the Preservation Opportunity Fund. All right, let's talk about how to apply. But first, let me see what questions have rolled in since I last looked. Okay, so I have a really good question, and I actually thought of this before the presentation today, and I hope I have a good answer for you, Fred. Soft costs, they can be used toward the match, but they also your match also must be in the form of unexpended funds. I totally agree that is confusing. What we mean by that is those soft costs, like your architect fees, you may have already paid those, but you can consider that part of your match, even though it's already expended. I know, but the unexpended funds, what we mean by that is the bricks and mortar part of your project. We don't want you to try and include things you've already paid for. I'm not explaining this very well. All right, say you have a large roof project and you've already purchased materials, you've already paid for some of the work. Those are expended funds that cannot be used toward the match. But soft costs are an altogether different thing. And oftentimes they do come before, I mean, obviously before the actual construction work begins. Soft costs are okay, but expended funds toward the lumber, the nails, the The actual bricks and mortar work are not allowed. I hope that makes sense. It's okay that your soft costs are already expended. Let's leave it at that. Okay. If you need further clarification, feel free to reach out. That is a great question, Fred, and I was worried someone would ask. Hopefully I explained it well. Okay, so another question. Looking to restore windows in a 93-year-old fireboat. Does it matter if we restore the windows to the original 1931 windows or a more recent 1956 version? That's a good question. So I guess it matters. I would look at the windows that are in it now. I mean, were they added in 1956 and you're not sure if you should go ahead and replace those 1956 windows, or if you have to go back to a previous version of windows that were in that boat. You know, it really depends on, you know, if you have 1956 windows in it now, feel free to replace with 1956 windows, I guess. I guess that's my, I mean, restore. I don't mean replace. Sorry. I meant to say restore. So restore them to the version that you think is most appropriate for your interpretation of that boat. If you're interpreting it to 1931, then I urge you to go back to those windows. But if the ones that are in it today that need to be restored are 1956 windows, go ahead and restore those. It really depends on your goals for the boat and your interpretation goals. I think either one is going to be okay. Just don't put in 1991 windows, you know, stick within, you know, either what you have now or what was before. Okay. Okay, yeah. So if you do need to reach out for further clarification, please feel free to call me because I'd be happy to talk to you about your projects. So can an organization partner with another organization on a project? For example, a community garden in a historic kitchen garden. Wow, yeah. I mean, we really urge cooperation and collaboration on projects. That sounds wonderful. Your applicant should be the one with the ownership interest in the property. Just to clarify that, but yes, absolutely, partnerships are encouraged. Okay. Wow, the application process involves several steps. Reading the guidelines is the first step. Please, please, please read the guidelines. Even if you sit through this whole webinar, read the guidelines because they will give you most of what you need to know, if not all you need to know to apply. The LOI, it's a letter of inquiry or a letter of interest. It's due by 5 p.m. on November 4th. You can apply right through our website, and I'll show you how in just a moment. It's a brief description of your project and your historic resource, what you want to do and why, and how much you think it's going to cost. Basically, it's not meant to take you a whole lot of time to submit. We just want to know what you're planning to do. We will choose from those LOIs a select number of applicants to apply. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Yeah, so out of those LOIs, we'll select the ones that seem the strongest and invite them to submit a full application. You will be informed in early December. So the first week or two of December, you'll be informed of this opportunity. And the full application will be due by 5 p.m. on January 10th of next year. It's not that far away. Don't be fooled. Applicants will be notified in March, whether you got the grant or not. So in plenty of time to plan for construction season. So submitting a letter of intent is super easy. Like I said, it's due by November 4th. Get it in early. You know, please don't wait till the last minute. We'll be reading these as they come in, and so get it in early. Submit it through our website. On our webpage that you see here, you'll see a red button that says Submit a Letter of Intent. When you click on that, it will take you to Smarter Select, which we use to collect grant applications. I'll show you how to use that in a moment. We will not accept any emailed materials, so please don't send us pictures or supplementary information or a letter of inquiry via email. Please don't do that. Go through the grant portal. There are some very good reasons for that. that I won't get into right now, but late submissions also won't be considered. Please don't be late with these things. We cannot make any exceptions. Sorry. Your letter of intent should be a maximum of 2 pages. It shouldn't be the entire history of your site. It's just meant to be brief, introductory, concise. So when you click on that red button on our website, it'll take you to Smarter Select, and you'll probably see something like this. If you have applied to us before through Smarter Select, you can simply sign into the account that you created before. If you don't remember your password, there's a way to reset that by clicking on the password reset button here. If you've never applied to us through Smarter Select, you're going to need to create an account. So make sure you click on the tab that says Create New Account before you attempt to sign in. Once you do that, it'll take you to this page, and it's a description of the Preservation Opportunity Fund grant program for this year. It is not a substitute for reading the guidelines. It's just a reminder of what the guidelines say. So make sure you read the full guidelines. There is a link to them on this page. You know, this is just meant to refresh your memory. At the bottom of the page, you'll see a couple buttons. One says preview. It's kind of light and it's blue and it's underlined here. If you click on that, it'll bring up the letter of intent application form so that you can preview it. All it asks you for is information about the applicant, like basic information, like an address and things like that. Information about the historic resource, and a button to upload your letter of intent. So it's very simple, not meant to take a lot of your time. When you're ready to apply, hit apply, and that will allow you to fill out the form and upload your letter. When you preview the application or the letter of intent form, you'll see this. This will pop right up on your screen. You can scroll through it and see exactly what we're asking you for. So it's nothing complex. It's very basic information that we want with your letter of intent. Before I continue, let's see if we have any questions about the letter of intent and how to apply. Okay. Good questions. Okay, so last year, how many of the funding priorities did the successful applications meet? I don't remember off the top of my head, but several of them. So as I mentioned, the Thomas Memorial AME Zion Church met a couple of our funding priorities. They had previous league involvement through our 7 to Save program, and they serve an underserved population. There may have been others that they met. I can't remember off the top of my head. Old Fort Johnson, part of their issues with their roof and their building were related to climate change. So there was that. I think they had a former league involvement through technical assistance grants or Preserve New York grants as well. I'm blanking on the other one, Tenbrook Mansion. The Albany County Historical Association was our third grantee from last year. They met several of the priorities. We had been involved with them for years through grants and through technical assistance. So, but they had received a number of grants from us in the past, preservation planning grants that helped them to get to this point of embarking on their capital project. We like to see those preservation planning studies, whether they are funded in some other way or through our TAG and P&Y grants. We really want to see that kind of planning in place for your capital project. If you don't have something like that in place, we at least want to see, and we will ask you in your application how you came up with the scope of work for your capital project. So good question, Emily. Another question about a museum that is operated by a 501c3. The building's owned by the town. Okay, so here's an ownership scenario. They have an operating agreement that defines their responsibility to conduct historic rehabilitation on the building. The town doesn't fund or repair the buildings. They are, yes. Yes, Dale. Short answer, yes, you are eligible to apply. That is exactly the kind of scenario that we're familiar with most with small museums. So yes, please feel free to apply as the 501c3. Be prepared to submit a copy of your agreement that you have with the town. But yes, that sounds like an ideal situation for this grant program. I have another question about eligibility. A 501c3, wondering if they can apply to use on a church owned by somebody else. So it sounds like you might want to act as the fiscal sponsor for the church that's owned by somebody else. Unfortunately, we're not supporting fiscal sponsors through POF. You have to have some sort of ownership interest in the building in order to apply. So good question. Very good questions. Okay. So, all right. So once you have previewed the letter of intent form, it's time to apply. So your letter of intent submittal will come up when you hit apply. You can look through the bullet points of information that we're looking for in the letter of intent. You upload it here on with the blue button. It says replace file on your screen because once you upload it, that's what you're going to see. You can click on the little eyeball icon next to it to see what you uploaded to make sure you uploaded the right file. Okay. So your letter of intent should include some very basic information. A brief introduction to your building or resource. Tell us its historic or architectural significance. Tell us a little bit about its history. It doesn't have to be comprehensive, but tell us the good stuff. Introduce us to your building or resource. Should include a concise summary of your project. What do you want to do and why? What point are you at? What have you done to prepare for your project? And how has that brought to where you're at now? You're ready to do this project. What does it entail? This is not meant to be a comprehensive grant proposal. By the way, this is an introduction. It's basically your elevator speech about your project to us. You want us to fund it, and you only have 2 pages to convince us that you should at least be allowed to apply. So be compelling, be concise, and just tell us what we're asking for. And that's some very basic information. All right. Should be no more than 2 pages. Make sure it's a PDF. Okay. So it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple letter. If you have partnerships involved, sure, tell us about your partnerships. It's always a good thing. Who's been involved in your project? Have you hired an architect? Have you had consultants on board with your project? Tell us all those things. Did you get a grant from us in the past? Hey, we got a TAG grant in 2017 and now we're ready to do the thing, so we love to know that. So tell us about our former involvement. Not that I won't remember you, but our involvement might precede my tenure at the league. So be sure and refresh our memory about what kind of involvement we've had with your project. All right, some tips for drafting your letter. Make sure you explain your ownership interest in the property, whether it's a lease or a memorandum of agreement, some sort of stewardship agreement. Be prepared to provide a copy of that if need be, but tell us about that situation. Tell us who the owner is. If it's not you, we need to know who the owner is. And the owner cannot be a private owner. So, not a private owner. Okay. So your summary of the project should include a brief description of your scope of work. What do you intend to do? What is the total project cost, or at least an estimate of it? What is your funding request? So we're asking for $10,000. We have a $10,000 match in place or proposed or whatever it is. Be clear that you understand the match requirement. Tell us how much you're asking for and what exactly that will fund within the scope of your larger project. Describe your matching funds, where they come from, whether you've got them in hand or not. Explain how your scope of work was determined. So we're doing this work and we know this needs to be done because we had a condition report, or however you've determined what needs to be done. We want to see, in this question, we really want to see that the organization that's applying, their board and their staff and everybody understands what needs to be done to the building and that they're in agreement on it. Okay. everybody's on the same page. And then finally, be prepared to explain a little bit about how your project meets our evaluation criteria and the funding priorities. I knew that was there somewhere. There it is. And we will talk about evaluation criteria now. All right, so how do we evaluate your letter of intent or letter of inquiry? We'll look at the significance of your site or your building or your object. What's its historic significance, its architectural significance? How is this project going to contribute to its level of preservation? So the quality of the project, basically. We'll look at the urgency. How badly does this work need to be done? Urgency counts. If it's an emergency or if it's urgent. The capacity of your organization to handle this capital project. Capital projects are daunting for any organization, but be sure that you're coming across as confident and capable of handling this project. Again, let us know that everybody's on board within your organization. It may have been rough getting to this point, but you are ready to go, you're in agreement, and you're carrying this forward to completion. And finally, if you think that you meet our funding priorities, please describe how you meet those priorities. We'll be considering that in our evaluation of your LOI and application. Wow, that was quick. Look at that. We're in under an hour. This QR code on your screen will take you to the Preservation Opportunity Fund website, where you will find guidelines. You'll find the application link for the LOI, which you should do soon, more sooner than later if you intend to apply. It doesn't obligate you, by the way, if you submit an LOI and we invite you to apply and you change your mind. I'm not going to hold it against you, but please communicate with us and let us know what you're thinking. If you have questions, we're always happy to answer those questions. You can reach Caitlin and me at grants@preservenys.org. That email goes to both of us. And I urge you to give us a call or send us an email with any questions that you may have. I have one more question. It looks like we have a few more questions and we have plenty of time. So go ahead and submit questions if you haven't already, or if I haven't answered your questions. One question: what other funding sources do you recommend for a private residence? That's a good question. We get a lot of calls from private property owners because they were told that when you buy a historic property, it may qualify you for grants, and it might, but just not grants from us or from the state. Funding sources for private residences are by and large limited to the historic tax credit program in New York State. And it is an incentive for historic preservation. It offers 20% back on your investment in your property in the form of income tax credits. So it's a dollar for dollar reduction in the state income tax you would owe based on the work that you do on your building. This is a program through the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And it's a good program. Okay, it's worth the effort to apply. It's really not difficult. It's meant to be accessible to homeowners. And there is a similar program for commercial properties as well that combines a federal tax incentive with the state tax incentive. So that's the quick answer to that. Nicole, if you want more detailed information, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to send it to you. All right. Will this grant be offered next year? Yes. So we anticipate making this grant available on an annual basis, opening in October of each year. So after a trial year last year, we've settled on October because we can let you all know if you got the grant in March. That seems to be pretty good timing for most projects. So yes, Trish, if you don't make it this year, or if you decide to wait, or if you have a project pending, this will come around next year at the same time. So can you expand on the 2026 celebration aspect and how that figures in? Good question, Renee. So I mentioned the semi-quincentennial commemorations next year. If you were preparing your site for programs or visitation involving that commemoration, then that is one of our funding priorities. So really, a lot of things can count toward that. If you're planning an exhibit, or if you're planning special tours, or um, any kind of programs that relate directly to that commemoration, then whatever work you're doing to your building to prepare for that would be considered a funding priority. So I'm always happy to discuss specific projects with any of you. So if you're still not sure, feel free to reach out. There is a guide to preparing your historic site or museum for the 2026 semi-quincentennial. It is distributed by the American Association for State and Local History. So the AASLH has a free guide to preparing your site for next year. So if you'd like that, reach out to the AASLH. If you don't remember or you're not sure what I'm talking about, give me a call. I'd be happy to hook you up. All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. You will receive a follow-up email from me with a link to the recorded program that you can view again if you really want to, or share it with your friends. I look forward to receiving your LOIs, and thanks so much for joining me. Have a great day.